Let's get started. Welcome to A Bit Much with T.W. Clausen. I'm T.W. Clausen, and it has been far too long since I have hung out with you guys. I apologize. You know, I knew this was going to happen. I tried to get the first few episodes of A Bit Much out in a timely manner, be consistent, because that's what you need to do in order to be famous on the internet, is be consistent. I'm joking, but it's actually very true. And so I don't think I'll ever be famous on the internet because I cannot be consistent. My life is full of ups and downs. I got a lot going on day to day. You know, sometimes I don't see my own family. Sometimes I don't talk to my friends. Sometimes I don't do anything except talk to my friends and family. This is life. This is how it is. And unfortunately, if you've decided to follow me in my very dirty shirts, because I just got off work and I'm making time to do this, you're going to have to follow a person who is living life, and doesn't really know what they're doing. So I'm making it up as I go. That's the slogan of this show, A Bit Much with T.W. Clausen. I'm making it up as I go. So that's gonna be the theme for. I keep hearing my voice. Oh, it's this guitar. Did not realize this was here. How about we all just sing a little song, huh? And those are the three chords I know. So thanks for joining me. That was it. Maybe you won't hear it in the recording, but behind me it was like vibrating every time I spoke. It was very annoying. So putting it on the couch to the left takes care of that. I told you. Look, if you haven't figured it out by now, the slogan is the most true thing I've ever said in my life. I'm making it up as I go. I don't have anything written down like I'm going to give you this big spiel. I have stuff that I have spoken to people about for the last month that's ruminating in my brain. I hope I use the word ruminating right. Percolating? Fermentating. Fermenting. That's the word. Fermentating's not a real word. And you know, it's gotten to a point where I keep annoying other people with these topics. So I figure I'll record myself. And anytime I want to annoy someone, I'll just send them a link to this video on YouTube and I can annoy them that way. And so that's what we're doing here today. We're vamping for 5 minutes so you can get to know my personality a little bit more. And then we can get into what I want to talk about. And unfortunately, we're only 3 minutes in. I got nothing. I got nothing, guys. This vamping is not working out. Why do we put God into our fantasy books? Why? This is a real question that I pose to people in several different writing groups. Ultimately, the question became a little bit more specific, right? Because I understand that there are certain groups of people that believe they know the answer as to why God is in our fantasy books. And if you're a Christian like I am, you put him there because you feel guilty if you don't, right? You're like, we got to put him in. That's not true. We put him in there because he is an ever-evolving source of inspiration and creativity for us. Some of us, at least, I should say. I'm not going to generalize an entire group of people, even if I am included in those people. But a lot of people were responding in a lot of the groups with things that were very... I don't know. I don't want to sound like the dick here, but very cliche, very derivative, just no effort was put into answering the question other than to self-satisfy the status quo in which they live. And I said I didn't want to sound like a dick, and then I said probably one of the meanest things afterwards. So we're just going to have to deal with that. I understand where they're coming from too. A lot of people, when they reacted to the question with, well, the Bible says this. God is self-evident. You know, we got the book of Romans that talks about how everybody knows that God exists, whether they acknowledge it or not. And that if left in a vacuum, God will express themselves in a way that we cannot deny. Things like that. I don't like that answer. And I know that that's going to upset some people because they go, well, that's it. That's the truth. That's it. End of story. And I don't think that that's true. I think that there's more to it than that. I think that God being self-evident is something that is a little bit more personal, is a little bit more foundational in human beings. I don't think that it lends itself necessarily to a vacuum of there's an entire genre of writing where God seemed, and when I say God, I mean like even lowercase g, God's pantheon, the divine intervention of some great beyond. These things, these entities, they are in the story of fantasy. And this is where it got a little bit more specific. My question wasn't necessarily, why is God in these stories? The question really came down to, why does God play such a significant part of these stories? It seems like an integral part to the plot for majority of the stories that I've read, at least. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being a bit hyperbolic when I say all. It's majority of stories that I have read. Sure, and I don't know every fantasy that's been written, and I haven't read majority of fantasies that are popular, but I know like Game of Thrones doesn't do a ton of God stuff. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I read a lot of Sanderson, Tolkien, Robert Jordan, all stuff like that, and all of these books have divine intervention or the will of God or God's playing a part of the plot in a story. I mean, look at C.S. Lewis. You got Narnia, you got Aslan showing up in person, well, in Lion, doing his thing, biting the heads off of white women and, you know, letting the children run free. You got Tolkien writing about the discordant will of the evil guy against the great creator God, and how that cascades into what we know as Lord of the Rings. And the main plot of Lord of the Rings is that there's an evil guy that works for the devil that wants his ring back, and a little, you know, baby boy, hobbit boy is like, nah, I'm good. And then there's an angel who takes him and takes him to the mountain to cast off the jewelry and stuff. You got Sanderson. I mean, I don't want to give too much away if you're into Stormlight Archives, but there's a whole thing in Stormlight Archives about the gods and the Almighty and all kinds of stuff. Even Mistborn. I mean, I've only read the first Mistborn book. I apologize, but I can't read everything all at once. Give me a chance, guys. But Mistborn takes the idea of like, what if the evil guy proclaimed himself God and it was true and became the thing in charge? Like that's a big theme of his that he talks about. Robert Jordan talks about the source for all kinds of stuff, and like the magic has like a female, male sides. And I've only read the first 2 of Wheel of Time. Again, I apologize. It's 14 books long. Give me a break. Jeez, dude. These are just quick examples that I can list off the top of my head. I'm sure that there's more. I'm sure that there are some that don't have any defining God as a part of the plot hook. I'm talking, I guess hyperbolically, I'm talking about majority of fantasy and why it has God in so much of its storytelling compared especially to its, cousin genre of sci-fi, where we see almost no God at all. Like majority, even if God is mentioned, it's mentioned in a way that's either hypercritical of it or in passing, and they really don't play a big part of the story itself. Now, granted, I think it's the opposite for sci-fi as it is for fantasy. So where I'm saying majority of fantasies have God in it, and you might be saying that's not true, there are a lot that don't, and I would say that's a small sect of fantasy. That's the opposite for sci-fi, right? There's majority that don't have God. Maybe there's a few that do. I mean, off the top of my head, I can list. There's Dune. That's basically fantasy anyway, but that deals with like a person becoming a god, basically. And then you've got, I don't know. There's other sci-fis out there that have God in them. The Force, the will of the Force in Star Wars. There you go, nerds. You can have that one. Enjoy that. I mentioned the Force in my stuff. I don't know why I'm criticizing you for watching this as a nerd when I'm the one with a Fantasy Tavern sign behind me in my Fantasy Tavern themed podcast recording studio. We have the will of God making its way into all these fantasy stories. And I ask this question, why? And do I want to do that with my fantasy? I'm currently writing. You probably know about it if you've seen my channel so far. It's called The Petty Lich. I'm currently writing something, and it definitely deals with gods. I have the Hollow Conclave, where there's a, procession of gods that are they're deities that represent gods that are the outer forces of creation and all that jazz, and then the deities are the ones that work within the world. It's a whole thing. If you want to know more about it, go read the book. Okay? And I can have those in there, but for the big fantasy that I want to end up telling, the one that I've been working towards since I started Petty Lich, and that I will continue to work towards as I write other stuff, I want to write a fantasy that is as good as the Stormlight Archives or the Wheel of Time or Lord of the Rings. I'm working my way towards that, right? And I have to ask the question, do I want gods to play a part in those stories? Because so far, the people that I've read, they have. And it's always interesting to me. I'm not sitting here critiquing it like it's this bad thing and we need to stop putting God into our stories, because every time God gets brought up in any way in these stories, I'm like, oh, we're talking about unknowable beings now? We're talking about people with power that have a dominion over a thing in creation? This is my jam. I love this. I also love the philosophical conversations that can come out of placing God into your story, because you have the freedom to ask the questions. And I think that leads into part of the answer for me, why we have gods in fantasy, where sci-fi doesn't ask those questions so much. Sci-fi is constantly asking the question, where are we going, right? Or what if? If you take all of sci-fi, you can like funnel it down into that. What if? Where are we going? And I don't think a lot of people care if God is a part of that when they're writing their stories. Or if they do, it is in more of a we to become God sort of situation. And it's not so much God's will versus our will in those. I have friends who are about to start reading Children of Time, which is, from what I've heard, a fantastic book, and I'm getting ready to read it because they're reading it, and I want to be able to talk to them about it. And that question is posed in such an interesting way where we see what it looks like when humanity decides to become gods, and then the ramifications of that. And I mean, that's asked over and over and over again throughout sci-fi, with robots and mutants and giant lizards and giant balls of goo, spaceships, clones, werewolves, giant face masks that live in the sky and shoot beams of lightning out of their nose holes. I don't know what that was. That's a stupid list of really cool sci-fi books is what that was. So while sci-fi is asking those questions of what if and where are we going, fantasy is posing different questions of who are we and what does a person represent? I'm trying to think of a good term, a good way of phrasing it, but we all know the hero's journey, right? And that's what fantasy is about. It's the hero's journey. It's about coming to terms with who you are and knowing your place in this world. That's what fantasy is. Just so you guys are aware, what you just saw live in real time was me coming to the realization of what fantasy is. And that's what it is, right? We are trying to find our place in the world and who we are, and that's what fantasy is asking. And so that's why I believe that God plays such a significant role in so many fantasy stories, whether it's a creator God, Christian God, a pantheon of gods, the Timeless from Neil Gaiman, whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to put in there, God is important. You know why? Because the second you put God, great, divine entity, whatever it is, whatever you put in there, you automatically are creating a system of levels where we're going to end up finding the hero, right? Whether that's in the middle and they move up, or it's at the top and they move down, or at the bottom and they move up. It doesn't matter what it is. They will find their place in this world. They will fight, they will struggle, they'll find conflict, they will become more, they will become better, they will prove themselves. I mean, just looking at the anime. Anime is all about proving yourself and I'm gonna be the best, literally in the song of Pokemon. So, and that's what we like to read. I mean, Stormlight Archives, you see a guy who doesn't want to be king, and the future of the kingdom is thrust upon him. You see a slave that becomes who is broken down into nothing to become something more. You see a woman who thinks so low of herself, she's willing to sacrifice herself for her family, only to realize she has more to offer the world, right? You have these stories, and then from them you have more stories. The Mistborn books, you have these characters who are trying to They want to break through the clouds to see the sunlight. You know, like that's what Mistborn's. When I read the first book, what I got out of it in this context, Lord of the Rings. You've got the whole idea that the most powerful person who's ever lived is going to be brought down by a hobbit. A little person who just wants to read and smoke weed all day. Like that's what fantasy is about a journey of modesty and humility and learning about who you are and what you bring to the world. And sure, that can be, you can say that that's just about every character's journey in every story. But I think that it's more significant in fantasy because it plays into the trope. It plays into the magic systems and where you fit in with these godly characters and the kings and the servants and the wizards and stuff. It is a part of the plot. So whenever you're writing a story that has a god in it, you are helping place your main character and show whether they can move up or down or laterally and where they're going to make that landing. And then it has significance, right? If you show that God existed or doesn't exist, and then our character becomes that thing, then you've established that they are greater than all the other characters. If you have a character who thinks they're the greatest in the world, the best human ever, and then God's like, hey, BT dubs, you're going to go through shit, and then you're going to understand what real humility is like, and then they can accept that and find real joy in their position they were maybe unhappy with at the beginning of the story because God put them down a few pegs. Like, that's more significant than just shit happens to this person and then they get better. You know, like it means more when there's a force behind all that, or when our characters become the force behind all that. I also think that because fantasy, you can see a line of fantasy that comes through mythology. Right? I mean, it's a direct line. You've got stories of old. You've got Greek gods. You've got stories from England and Scotland and Ireland, even into the Northern European areas where there's tales of fairies and fairyland and all that. And those stories come out of mythology and religion. Right? Like, this is what people believed. To us, we look back on it in 2020, whatever you're in, and we go, okay, this is a story that people told. This is just how they got by. But for them, that was real. I mean, Thor was real. Every time you heard thunder clap, that was Thor bringing his hammer down, right? Every time somebody would fall in love, they were hit by Cupid's arrow. I don't know if that was a very good one, but whatever. It's all I could think of off the top of my head. If your baby was suddenly different or unhappy, or your wife had postpartum depression and was dealing with all kinds of messed up stuff, they didn't have science to understand it. But they did have little demon creatures, and imps and dwarves and elves and pixies that would swap your baby out, or be a changeling of your wife that would cause you to be cursed for the rest of your life. So just throw them out. Just throw them in the fire. That's fine. It's cool. Let's do that. I don't know. Maybe I'm on some random soapbox all of a sudden, just mad at medieval and ancient people and their beliefs. But the point is that that's what they believed. Like, that was a belief. And so we see that moving into like the 1800s, when novels really became a thing. You know, we tend to forget how young novels as an art medium really are when they started to really become popular in the mid 1800s. They're only 150, less than 200 years old. And we saw George MacDonald was a huge proponent for telling fantasy stories, and he spelled his with PH. Yo, this shit's fantasy, PH fantasy. And he wrote those stories because he was inspired by the mythology and folklore of the people around him. And then that's what inspired Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. And you had other creators, like, I say creators like they're, it's 2022, creators, here we go. I hated that I just did that. But you have other writers and storytellers like Mary Shelley telling fantasy in modern days. I mean, Frankenstein was the other title is the modern Prometheus. She was taking an idea of ancient literature and bringing it to a modern time for her. So we're seeing folklore and mythology meld into the craft of storytelling in a way that the audience knows that this isn't real, right? We understand that this is fake, but the elements are being used to address real situations and bring to light things that we can utilize in everyday scenarios. Coming of age, being a better person, bravery, chivalry, love. All of those things were addressed in early fantasies that utilized folklore and mythology. And then Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, a few others, but I can't remember them because I don't care about them as much. They started to utilize those and tell greater, grander fantasy stories that eventually shaped an entire culture and created this genre of storytelling that utilizes creatures from folklore and religions of the past to tell stories that help people be better, to help people understand who they are and where they belong in this world. So, have I come to a conclusion on whether I'm going to have gods or God or the divine in my big fantasy story? No, I still haven't figured that out. I don't want to be cliche and derivative. I don't want to play into what the genre demands because that's what's expected. I want to tell my story. If doing that is better without a divine presence infusing itself into the plot, then I'm going to do that. If it's better to have a god or deities within the story to help make the points of humility, modesty, bravery, chivalry, all of those things, then that's what I'm going to do. But for now, I'm just writing a fun little story, a fun little guy story with lots of gods. There's gods on gods on gods action, man. It's great. We got gods having sex, making little baby gods that are hanging out with mortals, and they're, doing stuff. And if you want to check that out, check out the Penny Lich. Bundle 2, Volume 2 is out. Volume 3 is coming out soon, so you can check that out. So, yeah. Lots of gods. If you like gods, you're going to love the Penny Lich. I guarantee it. I didn't actually freeze the frame there. I just sat there the whole time I did that. So, all right, bye.